I remember the sky turning the color of rust. Mady and I were on the half-finished deck of our first house, and she was pointing out the different species of pine on the ridge. She could name them all from a mile away. Jaya was 7, and she was chasing a monarch butterfly across the new lawn. The air first smelled of ozone, like a storm was coming, and then it got thick with a scent I can only describe as wet soil and old bread. It was the smell of the world ending. The national alert system screamed from our phones for exactly 90 seconds before every network went dead. That silence was worse than the alarm. People started coming out of their houses, looking up at the sky, which was now a soupy, angry red. We saw the first car crash at the bottom of our hill, a simple fender bender, but the man who got out of his car did not check for damage. He just started screaming at the other driver, and then he began hitting the man's windshield with his bare fists until they were bloody. Mady pulled Jaya inside and locked the door. I stayed on the deck and watched the world I had built my life on, a world of load limits and stress tolerances, come completely apart in less than an hour. Today is the 10th anniversary of our survival. The main hall is full, but it is quiet. The 300 of us sit at the long metal tables, and our soft-soled shoes make no noise on the polished concrete floor. Sound is death. That is the first lesson. Satiba Zajak stands on the central dais. He is a broad man with a shaved head, and his functional dark jacket is buttoned over a crisp shirt. He looks out at us with intelligent eyes that miss nothing, and he begins to speak. His voice is calm and measured, never rising, yet it fills the cavernous space. He speaks of necessity, and he talks about the hard choices that built this community. He says the word sacrifice 4 times. During the speech, his gaze sweeps the room, and for a moment it finds a specific male, pacified, standing by the ration station. The man is young, with hair that would have been blonde, and Satiba's face tightens for a fraction of a second before the look is gone and his expression is hard again. I stand with Jaya, my hand on her shoulder. She is 12 now, and she has her mother's dark, watchful eyes. My wife, Mady, is on the serving line. Her slender frame is draped in the simple gray uniform of the pacified, and she moves with a placid efficiency. She scoops a precise portion of nutrient paste onto a tray and hands it to the person in front of her. Her face is unnervingly placid, and her eyes are wide and unblinking. I feel the old grief rise in my throat, a familiar pressure, and I push it back down. This is what it takes. This is the price. Your mother's service keeps us all safe, Jaya, I say quietly, my voice a low murmur. She is helping the order. I know, Daddy, she says, reciting the words she has been taught. As we move through the line, a junior medic named Lena is adjusting some of the serving equipment. She was a friend of Mady's before, a botanist who worked in the hydroponics bay with her. Lena pauses and, when she thinks no one is looking, she reaches out and smooths the collar of Mady's tunic. It is a small gesture of kindness, a forgotten habit from another life, and it feels loud in the silent room. Mady does not react. She takes the next tray. We get our food and find a space at a table. As we are leaving the hall later, Jaya looks back at her mother, who is now wiping down the empty counters with slow, methodical strokes. Daddy, does Mommy ever get tired of helping? The question is so simple, so innocent, and it hangs in the air between us all the way back to our quarters. Our apartment is a small square room with concrete walls and furniture that is built into them. It is neat because everything has a function and a place. Later that night, after Jaya is in her bed, I perform my ritual. Mady stands inert in the center of the room, her shift over, waiting for the next command. I take the brush from the shelf. I begin to speak to her as I work through the long, dark braid of her hair, my voice a low whisper that will not carry beyond the door. I tell her about a broken valve in the East Sector water recycler. I describe the new schematics for the air filtration upgrade. It is a one-sided conversation, and it is my penance. My hand feels clumsy tonight. I reach for the bottle of detangling spray on the shelf above her head, and I knock something else off. A small box containing a single framed photograph clatters to the floor. The sound of the glass shattering is a shock, a violent crack that feels like a betrayal of our most important rule. I crouch down to pick up the pieces of my failure. The photo inside is of me and Mady, 5 years before the spore fall, smiling on a bridge I had designed. We were so alive. Daddy? Jaya is standing in the doorway to her sleeping alcove. Her small face is full of concern. I look up from the broken glass, and then I look at Mady. My wife's vacant eyes, which always stare straight ahead into nothing, have darted down to the photograph on the floor. It is only for a second. Her expression does not change, but her eyes saw it. My heart begins to beat fast and hard inside my chest. It was nothing. A flicker of the overhead lights, a trick of my exhausted mind. It had to be. It's all right, sweetie. I just dropped something. Go back to sleep. She hesitates, her gaze fixed on her mother. I stand up and gently guide her back toward her bed, my denial, a fragile shield against the impossible thing I just saw. I turn to leave her room, but as I step back into the main living space, I hear her whisper to herself in the near darkness. But she looked. The next day, Jaya is quiet. She insists on coming with me when I guide Mady to her work assignment in the laundry. She is afraid, I can tell, but there is also a morbid curiosity in her eyes. I agree because I need to prove to both of us that last night was a mistake. We walk down the long, narrow corridor. The even lighting makes the white walls seem to stretch on forever, and the sound of our 3 sets of footsteps echoes slightly. Jaya walks on Mady's left side. Timidly, she reaches out and takes her mother's hand. We walk another 20 paces in silence. Then Jaya stops dead. Her face is pale, and her eyes are wide. I stop too. What is it? I ask. She does not answer. She just stares at her hand, which is still holding her mother's. I look at Mady. Her face is as blank as ever. I move around to Jaya's side, and I take Mady's other hand in my own. It is cool and limp, the way it always is. I am about to tell Jaya that her imagination is running away with her. Then I feel it. A faint pressure against my palm. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, tap, tap. It is a rhythm. It is weak, but it is deliberate. It is the 3-beat pattern from the lullaby Mady used to sing to Jaya every single night. The one about buying a mockingbird. The world I have so carefully maintained for 5 years shatters into a million pieces. She is in there. My Mady is in there, and she is screaming. I am not her caregiver. I am her jailer. From far down the corridor, I hear the heavy, rhythmic tread of approaching guard boots. The SOS was a brand burned into my palm, a secret heat I felt long after her hand was gone. I needed to know more. I needed a way to talk back, but every eye in Bastion was a camera lens wired straight to Satiba's central server. My access as an engineer was deep, a skeleton key to the facility's bones, but it could not make me invisible. So I looked for a place that was already dark, a corner of the system I could make darker for just a moment. I found it in the power grid for the hydroponics bay, where the pacified stood in their recharging alcoves after their shifts. I brought Jaya with me, telling her I needed help calibrating a nutrient pump, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. She held my toolkit, her small hands white-knuckled around the handle. Her eyes were huge in the bright, wet air of the bay, darting from the rows of green life to the silent gray figures in the alcoves. Mady was among them, her back to us, her head tilted slightly as the low-voltage current replenished the nanites in her system. "Stay right here," I whispered to Jaya, pointing to a spot behind a large water tank. "And watch Mommy. Just watch her." Jaya nodded, her body rigid with the fear of a child who had never broken a rule. I moved to a secondary power conduit panel, my own heart a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I plugged in my console, and my fingers flew across the interface, building a diagnostic loop that was designed to fail. It would create a feedback pulse, a microscopic power surge that would trip the breaker for exactly 700 milliseconds before the backup systems kicked in. It was a flicker, a breath, just long enough to disrupt the broadcast signal that kept them all prisoners. I engaged the sequence. The brilliant white lights overhead died, and for a fraction of a second, the entire bay was plunged into a shocking, absolute blackness. The constant drone of the pumps and fans ceased, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow. Then the emergency lights flared on, casting everything in a sickly red glow, and the generators roared back to life. My eyes snapped to Mady. It worked, but not how I had dreamed. She was not standing there, free. Her body was seized by a violent convulsion, a terrible shudder that shook her from head to toe. She pitched forward, out of the alcove, her hands flailing wildly. One arm swung out and smashed against a nutrient tank, the glass cracking with a sharp report. Clear fluid spilled across the concrete floor. She collapsed in the puddle, her limbs twitching, but before she went still, her right hand rose. With a single shaking finger, she traced a simple shape on the condensation covering a coolant pipe, a 5-pointed star. Then her hand fell, and she was just a body in a gray uniform again, face down on the wet floor. Before I could even move, a klaxon began to scream through the bay. Red lights flashed over and over, painting Mady's still form in pulses of blood. The alarm brought him. Satiba Zajac moved through the chaos with a calm that was more terrifying than any rage. His security detail secured the area, their weapons held at a low ready, while he walked directly to me. He looked from the cracked tank to Mady's collapsed form, then his intelligent eyes found mine. They missed nothing. "Report, Sato." "An aging power conduit," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It must have arced. I was running a diagnostic when it blew the breaker. The power surge likely caused the pacified unit to malfunction. Satiba walked over to the coolant pipe, his boots silent on the wet concrete. He looked at the condensation, at the faint star Mady had drawn. He studied it for a long moment, his face revealing nothing. I thought I was finished. Then he turned back to me, and the star was gone, wiped away by the sleeve of his dark jacket. "An aging conduit," he repeated, his voice soft. He looked at me, then at Jaya, who was trying to make herself small behind the water tank. "Every component must serve the whole, Sato. It must be reliable. It must do its job without fail, no matter the personal cost." I should know. I knew he was talking about his son, one of the first to be pacified, a story he used as a shield and a sword. It was a warning. I gave a stiff nod, unable to speak. He seemed to accept my silence, turning to issue orders to his men to clean up the mess and reset the breaker. He won a false victory, it felt like, a temporary reprieve. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway, his back still to me. "Oh, and Sato," he said, his voice carrying easily over the din of the cleanup. "My office will be assigning an officer to assist you, to ensure our critical systems remain secure." He left without looking back, and the open doorway felt like a cage door slamming shut. My new escort was a silent man named Corbin, whose presence was a constant weight on my shoulders. I was a prisoner in my own workshop, performing routine maintenance under his watchful gaze. But Mady's message was a fire in my mind, a star. It made no sense until I saw Jaya in our quarters that night, reading from the only book she owned, a tattered collection of pre-Sporefall lullabies. Her favorite was "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Mady used to read it to her every single night. The book was back in our quarters, and I needed to get to it. I also needed access to the medical archives, to the core programming of the Lethe protocol, which was sealed behind a door I had no clearance for. The next day, under Corbin's shadow, I found my chance. I knew the environmental controls for the archive wing had an intermittent flaw, a sensor that would trip if the coolant pressure fluctuated. It was my job to fix such things. I rerouted a secondary coolant line, creating the exact pressure drop I needed. An alert pinged on Corbin's datapad. I showed him the reading, explaining I needed to get inside to reset the sensor. He was reluctant, but the protocol was clear. He let me into the cold, dark room, but he waited right outside the door. Inside, surrounded by shelves of data storage devices, I told Jaya over my private comms link, "Now." I had instructed her to spill a tray of water near a corridor junction box, a small, harmless accident that would summon Corbin and give me a few minutes. While I waited, I worked quickly at the single computer terminal on the steel desk. I sliced through the low-level security and began searching for anything related to the protocol's development, for a name, Dr. Eris Thorne. I found a folder of his, encrypted. As I worked on the encryption, my comms crackled. "He's coming back," Jaya whispered. I pulled the entire folder onto a portable drive just as the archive door opened. Corbin saw me wiping down the terminal. I told him the sensor was reset. Later, hidden in the noise of the main generator room, I told Jaya to create another diversion, a much louder one. I needed to get back to our quarters. She was terrified, but she did it, triggering a harmless but loud pressure alarm in the water reclamation system. As Corbin and 2 other guards ran toward the sound, I slipped away into the labyrinth of service tunnels. I ran, my breath tearing at my lungs, and made it to our room. I found the book, and on the page with the star, tucked into the spine, was a folded piece of research paper. Mady's precise handwriting covered it, detailing a partial chemical formula for a fungal inhibitor. She had been so close. I made it back to the archives before my absence was noticed. That night, locked in a utility closet with my console, I finally broke Thorne's encryption. There were no documents, only audio logs. I played the last one. Thorne's voice was strained, full of a terrible pressure. He was speaking to Satiba. "The nanites don't erase consciousness, they just sever it from motor control. They're awake in there, Satiba. They feel everything. If you overload the central server, the broadcast will fail. It would free them, but the nanites are also suppressing the fungus. A hard reboot would remove that suppression." There was a long pause, a shaky breath. "They would revert to stage 1. God help us, Satiba. It's not a fail-safe, it's a murder switch for 50 people, and you're building it anyway." A click, and the recording ended. The silence in the closet was absolute. The air was cold on my face. It was not a humane solution. It was a torture chamber with a self-destruct mechanism. I was hunted now, I knew it. Satiba's net was closing. I could not do this alone. My mind raced, searching for an ally, for a single face and bastion that wasn't hardened by pragmatism. I thought of Lena. She had been Mady's closest friend in hydroponics, a quiet woman who tended the plants with a gentle touch. I had seen her, just once, place a hand on the shoulder of a pacified worker, a simple human gesture in a world that treated them like machines. She was my only hope. I slipped my guard again during the shift change, a chaotic 10 minutes of movement and noise. I found Lena near the mess hall, her face tired under the flat ceiling lights. I pulled her into a dark alcove. I didn't have time for a full explanation. I showed her the fragment of Mady's formula. I told her Mady was alive, trapped, and that this formula could be part of a cure, a real one. I pleaded with her, my voice low and desperate, asking for her help to access the medical lab's chemical stores. She looked at the paper, then at my face, her own, a mask of terror. She was afraid of the truth, afraid of what helping me would mean. But she nodded. She agreed to help. I waited for her in my quarters, the research note feeling heavy in my pocket. I watched the door, expecting her quiet knock. Instead, the door burst open, slamming against the concrete wall. 3 of Satiba's security officers filled the doorway, their stun batons energized. Behind them, half hidden in the corridor's light, I saw Lena. Her face was pale, and she refused to meet my eyes. The stun batons crackled with blue energy, the sound sharp in the small room. My world narrowed to those 3 officers and the pale, averted face of Lena in the corridor light. They moved with a rehearsed efficiency, 2 flanking while the one in the center took the lead. There was no negotiation, no command to surrender. They were here to take a piece of malfunctioning equipment offline. My first thought was of Jaya, alone in the generator room, waiting for me. My second was of the maintenance access grate just 10 paces down the corridor, a flimsy piece of steel I myself had inspected last week. The lead officer lunged, and I threw myself sideways, not away from him but towards the wall, slamming my shoulder into the concrete. The impact jarred my teeth, but it gave me the angle I needed. I kicked out, not at a man but at the emergency release valve for the fire suppression system beside the door. A pressurized hiss erupted, and a thick cloud of retardant foam filled the doorway, blinding them for a second. It was all I needed. I scrambled into the corridor, my boots slipping on the fresh tile, and threw my entire weight against the access grate. It groaned and popped free, falling with a clang into the darkness below. I dropped into the void without looking back, landing hard on a pile of insulated conduit in the service tunnel below. My ankle screamed in protest, but I forced myself up and ran, limping through the tight, damp darkness. The shouts of the officers echoed from above, followed by the heavy thud of their boots on the main level. They would not follow me down here, not right away. This was my world, a maze of pipes and wires that I knew better than my own name. I moved deeper into the facility's guts, the only light coming from the occasional red emergency bulb spaced far apart on the concrete walls. After a few minutes, a new sound joined the drip of water and the low vibration of the air recyclers. It was Satiba's voice, calm and authoritative, coming from the PA speakers bolted to the ceiling at every junction. "Attention residents of Bastion," the voice boomed, echoing down the long tunnels. "Tadis Sato, our lead engineer, has suffered a breakdown. He has embraced a dangerous delusion and attempted to sabotage critical community systems. For the safety of everyone, he has been declared an enemy of the people. His daughter, Jaya, and his assigned pacified unit have been taken into protective custody." The words hit me harder than any stun baton. Jaya, matey. He had them. I leaned against the cold concrete, my breath catching in my throat. I was alone, hunted, and the two people I was trying to protect were now his hostages. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small audio player with Thorne's confession. I held it in my palm, the plastic cool against my skin. "They're awake in there, Satiba." Thorne's haunted voice played in my head. And then another voice, Matey's last lucid words to me, a memory so sharp it was a physical pain. "Don't let them erase me." Recalibration. That's what they would do to her now. A complete system wipe, reinforcing the nanite prison, burying her consciousness so deep that no flicker of a star, no desperate SOS could ever get out again. That was the ultimate erasure. Satiba thought he could break me with his threats, that the thought of Jaya's safety would bring me to heel. He was wrong. My grief was no longer a weight that pulled me down. It was a fire that burned away everything else. There was no saving Bastion. There was no saving my old life. There was only Matey, trapped in the dark, screaming without a voice. I tightened my grip on the audio player until the plastic cracked and splintered in my fist. The sharp edges bit into my palm. "All right," I whispered to the dripping darkness and the endless concrete. "Let's burn it all down." I knew the location of the Latha Protocol's central server, a cold, secure room on the sub-level below the medical wing. It was on lockdown, the door a slab of reinforced steel that could withstand a blast. But I had designed the ventilation for that room. I knew there was a manual override lever for the fire suppression system inside a narrow shaft, a space too small for a man to crawl through, but just big enough for a child. I needed Jaya. I moved through the tunnels with a singular purpose, my limp a dull, rhythmic counterpoint to the pounding in my chest. I emerged through a utility hatch into the quiet, dim corridor of the youth barracks. The air was still, and the rows of neat, empty bunks looked like tiny tombs. I found her in the common area, sitting at a table with two guards, a plate of untouched food in front of her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and terrified. She saw me, and a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe more fear, crossed her face. I didn't give the guards a chance to react. I swung a heavy pipe wrench from my tool belt and smashed the ceiling, mounted PA speaker, which exploded in a shower of sparks and a shriek of feedback. While they were disoriented, I grabbed Jaya's hand and pulled her back towards the utility hatch. In the relative safety of the tunnel, I knelt in front of her. Her whole body was trembling. I held her small shoulders and made myself look directly into her eyes. "Jaya, I have to tell you the truth," I said, my voice low and urgent. "The whole truth. Your mother isn't just gone. She's trapped inside her own body. The Latha Protocol. It's not a kindness. It's a prison. And Satiba knows. He built it that way." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "The pacified. They're awake?" "Yes, all of them. And I am going to set your mother free. But to do it, I have to shut down the server that controls them. When I do, the fungus inside them will wake up too. They will become shriekers, all of them, inside our walls. It will destroy this place, Jaya. It will be hell. I let the horror of that sink in. I pulled a folded map from my pocket, a schematic of the outer tunnels I had drawn from memory. This map leads to an emergency exit on the north side. You can take it and run. You can save yourself. Or you can help me. I can't get into the server room without you. The choice is yours. She looked from the map in my hand to my face. The terror in her eyes was slowly replaced by something else, a hard resolve that looked so much like her mother's. She wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. You can't do it alone. She took the map, but only to fold it and put it in her own pocket. My heart ached with a terrible mix of pride and guilt. I led her through the maze of tunnels to the sublevel, to the ventilation shaft that fed into the server room. The opening was small and dark. I gave her a small light and told her exactly where to find a lever. She looked at the black opening, then back at me, and nodded once. She crawled into the darkness, her small form disappearing completely. I was left alone in the echoing silence of the tunnel, the fate of 300 people now resting on the shoulders of my 12-year-old daughter. A heavy clank echoed from the shaft, and the steel door to the server room hissed open. Jaya stood there, her face smudged with grime. I pulled her into the room with me and sealed the door behind us. The room was cold, the air still, and the steady blink of countless server lights on the tall metal racks felt like 1,000 watching eyes. I went straight to the main console, and my fingers flew across the interface, pulling up the core systems, searching for the master control for the nanite broadcast. I found it, buried under layers of security protocols. I began to bypass the first firewall. Just as the second firewall fell, the door burst inward, torn from its magnetic locks. Satiba Zajak stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. In his hand he held not a gun, but a heavy steel wrench. "You would burn the Ark to save one ghost?" he screamed, his voice raw with disbelief, and he charged. He swung the wrench in a wide, brutal arc. I ducked under it, the steel whistling past my ear, and shoved the console into his path. He stumbled, catching his balance, and came at me again. We grappled, a desperate struggle of two men in the heart of the machine. He was stronger, his weight pinning me against a server rack. The wrench came up ready for a final blow. Then, from the side, a red fire extinguisher flew through the air and slammed into Satiba's legs. He roared in pain and surprise, his balance broken for just a second. It was long enough. I shoved him away and lunged for the console, my fingers finding the last command line. I slammed my palm down on the enter key. An alarm, higher and more piercing than any I had ever heard, shrieked through Bastion. The lights on the server racks flashed red and then died. The room was plunged into an echoing darkness, lit only by the emergency strobes. The nanite broadcast was gone. In the pulsing red light, I could see Satiba on his knees, his face slack with shock. "What have you done?" he choked out, his voice a horrified whisper. I didn't answer him. I ran to the adjoining medical bay where they would have taken her. The door was unlocked. Mady was strapped to an examination chair, unconscious. As I reached her side, her body was seized by a violent convulsion. Her back arched, and a terrible silent scream seemed to rip through her. Then her eyes flew open. They were not blank. They were her search, and they were filled with a decade of agony and a universe of love. Her voice was a raw shred of sound, a dry rasp. The nursery, spore-resistant, her eyes found Jaya, who had followed me into the room. "Run!" The ashen blight was surging. I could see it in the dark veins that began to trace their way up her neck. But before the fungus could claim her, her gaze locked with mine. She gave a single, sharp nod. The request was clear. The mercy was hers to ask for, and mine to give. The sounds of chaos, of panic, and the first guttural snarls of the newly awakened were beginning to break through from the corridor. I lifted the pneumatic bolt gun from my belt. "I love you," I told her. The bolt gun hissed, a sharp, clean sound that cut through everything. I did not look back. I grabbed Jaya's hand and pulled her with me as we ran, the screams from outside the room finally breaking through the door, the sound of the Ark breaking apart all around us. reused the map, navigating the chaos-filled tunnels as the shrieks of the newly turned and their victims echoed behind us. We reached the emergency exit, a heavy wheel lock on a steel plate set into the mountainside. Together, we forced it open and stumbled out into the gray, toxic dawn. The air was thick with spores, a permanent fog that clung to the gray fungus covering the dead landscape. Behind us, the mountain was silent. Bastion, the Ark, was now a tomb. We were alone, fugitives with nothing but each other and the weight of what we had done, carrying only Matey's final cryptic clue. We had traded the safety of a lie for a dangerous, uncertain truth, and our real journey had just begun.